going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States.
Short term, we have to brace for the impact. We work hard to find a way to overcome these incremental costs.
If you put a tariff, you make everything coming in from abroad more expensive. That means people will buy less of it. They'll shrink their standard of living.
We will impose a 25% tariff on all automobiles that are not produced in the United States. We need to prepare for the impact in the short term. We put a lot of effort into figuring out how to get beyond these additional expenses. Imposing a tariff raises the cost of all imports from overseas. People will therefore purchase less of it. Their quality of life will decline. Music, Subaru, a company that used to prosper by depending nearly exclusively on the US market, is currently in a tight spot. Tariffs have transformed its greatest benefit into a stifling liability rather than a safeguard. By March 2026, analysts projected that the corporation may lose around $2.5 billion, wiping away the earnings from the previous year. Since America accounts for over 70% of Subaru's worldwide sales, every decision feels like a last-ditch play on a single, dwindling table. More than 662,000 of Subaru's 936,000 cars sold globally were in the US in 2024 alone. Once a sign of strength, this dependency today looks like a trap. That reliance has been transformed into what some refer to as a terrible financial spiral by a 25% tariff. There is no avoiding the question. When the market on which a business depends turns into its biggest danger, can it still thrive? If you're finding this eye-opening, please hit the like button before we start. We are able to beat the algorithm thanks to it. Furthermore, the suffering is not limited to the corporate level. It affects American drivers, who are the ones who keep the market moving. Once affordable lifelines are now beginning to veer toward luxury status. From the Forester to the Ascent to the WRX, Subaru of America has been compelled to increase sticker costs by anywhere from $750 to over $2,000 throughout its entire portfolio. Consider the Forester, one of the nation's most well-liked family SUVs. On paper, a price increase of $175 to $2,600 might seem insignificant, but for middle-class households who are already struggling financially, it is enough to deter them from making a purchase. It's not just Subaru either. TD Economics analysts warn that tariffs may increase the average price of a new car in the United States by up to $5,000 to $10,000. That change affects more than simply finances. It changes whole purchasing patterns. More families are compelled to purchase second-hand cars as new ones become unaffordable. However, the pressure is increasing here as well. Because supply is limited and demand is high, used car prices are always rising. Every level of the market is squeezed as a result, giving regular Americans less options and greater responsibilities. You probably care if you've read this far. Think about signing up to receive updates. Price shocks are not limited to retail spaces. They have disastrous repercussions as they cascade downward through America's industrial core. Workers in the Midwest and elsewhere who once thought tariffs would protect their jobs are now witnessing assembly lines come to a standstill. The pledge to save American employment starts to sound more like a sarcastic joke than a genuine program. The rising cost of imported parts makes manufacturing schedules unfeasible. Automakers are compelled to make difficult decisions. Reduce shifts, shut down plants, or shut them down completely. Stellantis has already closed a factory in Canada and another in Mexico, changing its footprint out of survival rather than strategy. Due to General Motors' reduction in production at its plants in Indiana, thousands of workers are unsure of their future. Subaru has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in expanding its capacity in the direction of Indiana after being caught in the crossfire. However, communities lack the time necessary for these investments. New production lines come later than layoffs. And the wait is too much for a lot of workers. Eviction notices, empty pantries, and the crippling fear of unemployment now confront families used to consistent paychecks. The tremors shake entire towns. Regular customers leave local eateries. Programs at schools are reduced. And in areas like Lafayette, Cuco, and East Moline, what begins as a trade policy argument in Washington turns into a lived crisis once prosperous communities start to resemble ghost streets. The tariff war is more than just a catchphrase for these cities. Their communities were held together by the abrupt collapse of the economic lifeblood. Instead of a single business, a complex network of factories, suppliers, and cross-border flows held North American manufacturing together for decades. That equilibrium has been upset by a single, comprehensive tariff decision. The figures are glaring for Subaru. In 2024, almost 45% of the cars it sells in the US will come from Japan, and by 2025, that number will rise to 50%. Now, there is a 25% penalty for each of those vehicles, which immediately wipes out profitability and makes the business reevaluate where and how it builds. Similar problems are faced by General Motors, Honda, and other companies who are rushing to reorganize manufacturing out of necessity rather than efficiency. Chaos is the outcome. While logistical networks intended for stability and predictability are thrown into chaos, assembly plants unexpectedly run out of necessary parts. Increased use of local suppliers is encouraged. However, capacity does not increase instantly. Rather than filling the void, shortages proliferate, expenses increase, and bottlenecks impede the once easy flow of components across North America. What was initially promoted as America starts to resemble America in fragments. It is impossible to avoid the dilemma. Washington has undermined the fundamental ecology that made U.S. auto manufacturing globally competitive in its efforts to increase domestic control. Today's automakers must contend with increased expenses, sluggish schedules, and brittle supply chains. However, the promise of independence has given way to a new sort of dependence, one that is reliant on shaky makeshift solutions. Although Subaru is among the most obvious victims, it is by no means the only one. Costs and declining margins are currently plaguing the entire auto industry, both American and Japanese. In the current fiscal year, it is anticipated that Toyota, Honda, Mazda, and Subaru will collectively lose almost $19 billion. Their balance sheets were depleted by tariffs alone, not by subpar performance. And it's no better for Detroit's legendary automakers. Already struggling with growing input costs, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis now have to deal with an extra $42 billion in expenses. Financial strain of that nature is not limited to business reports. As a result, buyers have fewer options, smaller product selections, and higher sticker costs. A 25% general tariff, according to the Center for Automotive Research, may increase industry expenses by up to $18 billion in 2025 alone. To put it in perspective, that amount is greater than the yearly GDP of whole nations, and it has the potential to make one of America's most robust industries a burden on the overall economy. The cost is tremendous, even in the short run. Before the secondary impacts, such as falling demand and declining investment, even completely materialize, estimates indicate that losses of over $5 billion have already occurred in the first year. What used to be a rivalry between businesses is now a general struggle for survival, where no giant, no matter how famous, is exempt. Canada has quickly turned catastrophe into opportunity while the US is in a bind. Cars manufactured north of the border suffer an effective rate of only around 12.5% due to tariffs that slap imports from Europe and Japan at a punitive 25%. Half the trouble and all of a sudden a huge benefit. Ottawa grabbed the opportunity. In an effort to boost Windsor's auto industry, a $2 billion investment package was introduced, indicating that Canada hopes to become the next big draw for international automakers. That kind of state-backed support is difficult to overlook in a world where margins are being pushed to the bone. The industry has responded quickly. Long-standing US-based Japanese and European businesses are now publicly considering moving their future capacity to Canada, where the road appears less perilous. A broader rebalancing of North America's auto map is hinted at by even the first steps, like as investigating new facilities and negotiating with regional suppliers. The irony is too keen to overlook. Instead, policies aimed at ensuring U.S. industrial dominance are giving its closest neighbor a direct competitive edge. Canada is putting itself in a position to collect what was once marketed as protection. Subaru is forced to battle for its American presence due to tariffs and declining profit margins. The business has announced an investment of $40 billion, or roughly $277 million, to move manufacture of its new Forester to Indiana by the fall as a way to demonstrate resiliency. The plan is obvious on paper. Increase annual capacity from about 340,000 to 350,000 vehicles to over 400,000, hence lowering dependency on Japanese imports. However, risk is not eliminated by ambition. The strategy mainly depends on a supply base that is already under stress due to constraints ranging from steel to electronics. The flow of parts is still susceptible to the same tariffs and shortages that affect the entire industry, even if Subaru is able to assemble more cars in the US. Put another way, if the inputs are unstable, adding more won't ensure stability. The timing poses a greater risk. Customers may not wait for Subaru's production change to pay off because they are already irritated by price increases and erratic supply. It is challenging to restore loyalty after it has been damaged. Furthermore, Subaru may lose much more than money if it hesitates in a saturated market where competitors like Toyota, Honda, and even assembly factories in Canada are offering competitive alternatives. They can lose their position in the American auto industry as a result. Although the investment might give Subaru some time, it doesn't address the pressing issue. Is the business purchasing some breathing room until the market changes, or is it reimagining its US presence? A 25% tariff has effects that go well beyond just one carmaker. The trust that international partners once had in the US market is shaken by it. Numerous analysts now warn that these measures may force Japan into a recession, with repercussions extending throughout Asia's intricately linked economies. At home, American consumers deal with rising costs, an unstable labor market, and a gradual decline in their own financial future confidence. Governments and businesses throughout the world are not waiting for Washington to calm down. They are subtly changing the global trade map, diversifying supply chains, and finding alternatives in Canada, Europe, and Asia. The paradox then becomes apparent. What does it say about the strength of the America First promise if even a recognizable industry like cars cannot be protected? Is the nation it was intended to empower being isolated, or is prosperity being safeguarded? That's the problem that today plagues America's economy and image. The question is whether the US is keeping pace with the rest of the globe or if it is just standing still. What are your thoughts? Are tariffs silently undermining the basis of US leadership, or are they actually strengthening the country? Thanks for sticking around. If you found this valuable, like and subscribe to support more content like this.